think I'll ever fall again there. Don't forget to keep a close eye on that step. Today we're going to be taking a look, and we're going to be talking about our job while we waned. Our job while we waned. We have a tendency in life to have to wane for quite a few things. Either in line at the grocery store, a dentist office, doctor's office, and our doctor that we go to, you waned. I don't think I've ever been there that I didn't wait 45 minutes just to get in. I don't know what, even if you're there almost first thing in the morning, it doesn't seem to matter. So we wane. And what do we do while we wane? Well, I don't know what we would do without our cell phones in the years past, what we did. Even with the COVID, it's kind of taken away some of the ability to go pick out a magazine and look at it, and now they're kind of stripped of those reading materials. Our doctor's office, as I was sharing, had a nice, like a table there, real low, so that kids and anybody could go and grab, and that's not like that no more. There's no table there, it's gone. And so they took away some of the ways that mothers could take care of their kids there while they were waning. And it was a major issue there. And you would think that once you got in there, you wouldn't have to wane any further. But it seems like once we got in the back, we still had to wane. I can remember sitting in there, and in there was nothing to play with unless you started tampering with some of the instruments. They look in your ears and all that, and I never was brave enough to do that, so I usually sat still and just kind of waned there until the doctor or nurse would come in. So, and it always amused me when the nurse was done checking your vitals and put everything away and laid them down and said, in just a little bit your doctor will be in. Well, it's almost like what God tells us, in just a little while the pain will be gone. You're only here for just a little while. Well, you're only here for a little while in light of eternity. We are going to spend some time. Last week we talked about how brief life was. In the doctor's office, it is not brief. It doesn't seem brief, and you're there and with nothing to do except if you have a cell phone, you can root around on it. And I'm not even that good. I get mine messed up and then it's froze up or something, and I can't even look at it anyway. So, but if you have that, you can kind of keep yourself occupied. Today we're looking at what's our job? What's our job while we wane as Christians? I've talked to lots of people over the years, and they want to know what God wants them to do. What does God want you to do? It's nice to know that, but He has already told us quite a few times what to do. And if we don't do those things, He's not going to tell us anything bigger or more to do until we do what He's asked us to do at the beginning. And this is kind of the beginning. This is for everybody. He's talking here in what we're going to be looking at in a moment, the text. He's talking to Christians. So we don't have to leave out, and you're going to say, oh, gee, the first thing you need to do is get saved. Now, the reader here, or the writer of this book, of James, is telling us, Christians, what we should be doing before Christ comes again. While we're waiting for Him to return, that's important. So let's take a look, and we're going to look at I'm going to share just verbally another text later that's dealing with similar things for know what to do and how to get there and what we need. James chapter 1 verse 27 says, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. James is a genius when it comes to taking a chapter, bring it in and condense it into one paragraph or one sentence. He was a man of few words, but he was able to condense things into that. Now, James' book could be 3 times that big if he was in the same thinking as Paul. But James was different. James, we're talking here, was the brother of Jesus. He himself, over the years, probably made fun of Jesus, as we see him, his brothers telling him, you ought to go and be with your people if you're going to be a leader, and he was mocking them. But Jesus, his steady life before his brothers, he won them over, at least some of them anyways, to realize what it takes. And they realized that Jesus was the way. And James was one of those brothers. Became pretty important in the early church. And so here we had James sharing that. There's one other scripture, Luke chapter 10, verses 29 through 37. We have the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan story doesn't start right there. You have to go back a little bit further to see what provoked Jesus to share the story about the prodigal son, or not the prodigal, but the Good Samaritan. There was a wise, we call him the rich young ruler sometimes, and there was a man that came to Jesus who already knew that he was doing what it took, he thought, to make it to heaven. And he had enough nerve, or I don't know what else you would call it, except maybe stupidity, maybe. He came to Jesus and said, what does it take to make it to heaven? What does it take to make it, to please you, to do? And Jesus shared some stuff. He shared with him, and the guy knew what Jesus was, at least he thought he knew where Jesus was going to go with this thing, and he thought he had the answer. And when he got right down to the end there of talking to this young man that was probably a religious guy as well, and he said, what does it take? And he was speaking to this guy, and the guy was ready to have his back patted and ask, figured Jesus would pat him on the back and say, you're doing awesome, just keep it up and keep going and you'll be good. He asked the guy a question. Let's take a look at that question here. Jesus asked him a question, and he asked him, which command is the most important? What is the most important thing? This is where the guy was, he probably had a smile from ear to ear when Jesus asked this question, because he knew the answers. He had sat in Sunday school and the whole 9 yards and knew all the answers that you would need to have so that you'd be able to tell the class what's going on. Here's what the man answered. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Then he did something else that led him to the place where Jesus had to share this story. He was wanting to further justify how good he was. He said something to this effect, who is my neighbor? Now we're getting somewhere, Jesus thought, I'm sure. So Jesus shared the story of the Good Samaritan, so we could answer that question. There's 2 things here. We're going to get to that, so just hang on. Those 2 texts today that we shared, those are what it takes for us to make it to heaven. If I just left it at that, and if Jesus would have just left it at that rich young ruler, or whoever he was, or however you wanted to call him, would have thought he was perfect and was in good shape and didn't have anything else to do. Today we would say, no worries. We don't have any widows and orphans to worry about. Once in a while we have one at the church, and maybe there's an orphan, not so much. So we think, well, that part of that text is, I'm in good shape with that. I don't need to do that. And the second part is not allow yourself or to keep yourself from being polluted by the world. And if we just looked at it, what it said there in the first glance, we could say, we're good to go. I'm not letting myself be polluted. I'm keeping myself from this and that and so forth. And so we sigh a breath of relief again, just like this young man did with Jesus. But Jesus didn't stop there when he said the guy had enough, whether he was jogged by the Lord or what, to ask that final question of, who's my neighbor then? That is the gist of what we're going to be looking at here today. A good portion of what we're going to look at. In the day of Christ and James and the early church, it was a major deal. We might not be dealing today with widows and orphans that we have to take care of. Although if we run across those, certainly would fit into the category that we need to take care of them as well, and take care of all people like that. And then not to let, this is James' rendering of what we're doing here. So it was this idea of people like orphans and widows, and that was a serious thing back then. If they didn't have a husband and no male children that was able to take care of them, they could get a job and take care of her, their mother, then there was a serious problem. They were left hungry sometimes. They weren't able to care for themselves, and it's like the world today, there was a bunch of thugs and thieves back then too, and so they would take the lady's money or do things to her that made it even worse. God has always cared for those people that have no way to take care of themselves. He has always made provision. In the Old Testament and the New, you can go all through there, and you could, what did Jesus say about not taking care of the little kids if we treated them poorly or led them down the wrong path? It would be better if you took a millstone, hung it around your neck, and went out into the depths of the ocean and dropped yourself in. That would be the better of the things that would happen to you. God has a tender spot for those that are in need of help. And he wants his children, the church, to take care of those needs. I don't know where it was or where it went or how it all happened in the United States. We don't have that. We were relieved of that responsibility by our government. Has made provision for widows and orphans and so forth through the way they care for people. And so the church says, I don't need to worry about that no more, accepting that my tax money is going to take care of that. So and I found that today, when you start asking people to help, they're not at all ashamed to reach in their wallet and help. However, don't ask me to do something that takes my time. So we're not as readily able to give of ourselves to go and sit and visit and help, build, do whatever we need to do, but we're willing to pull out $100 or that keeps getting bigger, that little pile of money that we were able to grab quickly. And so any amount of money might not be the problem. But for me to do it, it's hard. That's not an easy thing. So here we have, in James' day, people that were in need, which were widows and orphans, were the ones that needed cared for because they couldn't do it. The whole book of Ruth was dealing with 3 widows and 3 deceased men, husbands, children. And we find the book of Ruth, starting with the loss of Naomi's sons and her husband. Husband first, then each of the sons were killed or died, and left her and their wives without any way to take care of themselves. Naomi was from Israel. She was an Israelite who moved to Moab so that they could find food. There was a famine that was very rough in the land of Israel, so they moved there, and her husband and the kids, they all moved there. They grew, they married, and then tragedy struck, and the husband died, and then the sons died. And then at the beginning of Ruth, the book of Ruth, we see Naomi leaving to go back to Bethlehem to live, because things had got better there, and now that there was nobody to take care of her, I think she felt that maybe she would have a better chance of having somebody help her in her homeland, in her own place. So she left and went. And we know the story of Ruth, the one daughter-in-law, refused to leave her and go back to her parents, and the other one did. The other one stripped back and went away. Thus we have Ruth being there in that story to share. What an awesome story if you wanted to read that sometime. But this is all due to this idea that James is talking about here, that we need to take care of the widows and the orphans. In the Old Testament, when somebody was truly that way, people were asked to do that. God was trying to get them to do and take care of these ones. There was another way, that there was something called a redeemer, a family redeemer. That'd be a close relative would buy all their property and take the widow, and she would become a wife to the redeemer, or somebody else would be the wife. It was, in this case, Boaz was the main character that was going to be that redeemer, and he bought all of the property and took Ruth as his wife, and in hopes that she would have a child that would be able to keep Chilion, which was her original husband's property, alive, and keep something going there for the family so they wouldn't lose it. And that's exactly what happened. And that story is very close to me. It speaks to me in that God, isn't it awesome how God will slip in somebody that's not even an Israelite into the mix of the lineage of Jesus? Boaz and Ruth had a son, and they called him Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David. And that was the lineage. It was a Moabite woman who was called and spoke right in the lineage of, and there was another woman, just for, we're on that vein, Rahab, the prostitute, was also listed in the lineage of Jesus, because she believed and she became part of them, and she was favorable to the spies when they came. But God works. He's no respecter of persons. There's no group of people that have special favor, that can do things that are wrong and sinful, and yet, well, you're of that group, so you're okay. We tend to think that. We tend to get to a place where we think God favors certain groups or people or us, and we got special favor. The only groups that Jesus favors are those that are born again, that are saved, that are living for him. And even all of us have to live in a world where the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The sun shines on both. So we are not subject to the bad things that are out in the world, but we're protected and provided for by a God that cares for us very much. That's extra. You don't have to pay anything for that extra today. Luke, Jesus told us in Luke about what it takes to be saved, to be in that group of people that God is watching over the church. We have to love the Word with all of our heart. We've seen that was a commandment from the beginning until now. Someplace along the way, Jesus was asked to about which one of these, what's the one commandment? I think they were trying to trap him and trick him, and Jesus said pretty much the same thing, which is the golden rule. It comes up that we are to love our neighbor. That right there, that simple, even without the beginning, if we love our neighbor, we're already loving God. I mean, it would be obvious to put that loving God with all of our heart, mind, soul, strength, put that in there so that we don't forget it. But when we do the second part of that, loving our neighbor as ourselves, we are automatically loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and all that. So Jesus knew what he was doing when he took that command and put them together and said it. And so it was this young priestly guy or whoever he was doing all the right things, and he came to Jesus, and not by himself where nobody would see this. He did it in a way that was like, it'd be like me going down in a crowd of people and saying, I already have it in my head. I know that I know what the answers are. So when he asked the questions, I'm going to look really good to all of these people standing around. And then he took it further. We have to do more than show and look good. We can have our hair combed and cleaned up and smell good and all that, but inside of us, we could be far away from God. Jesus was bringing out what really is important, and it's what happens inside of us. It's that love that we need. It is that action that we need to take place with. How does all of these two scriptures fit in to us today? Those are all stories that we know and we've heard many times. Who was the neighbor in the story of the Good Samaritan? Jesus asked them at the end of that story. Now, who was the neighbor to the one that was robbed and beaten up and left for dead? And they said, it has to be the Samaritan guy that took care of him. That tells me that for the Christian side of that, from the other perspective, from the Good Samaritan side of the story, everybody that's in need would be his neighbor. And if you're on the beat up side, if he was the one that was in the ditch, laying, bleeding and bruised and robbed, who would be your neighbor? Anybody that helped me would be our neighbor. And so that's in this story, that is where I'm looking to see that is what needs to take place. Taking care of the widows and orphans, we could turn that into today, for us today, that would be those that are in genuine need that we come into contact with in our day-to-day life. All of us in our day-to-day life run into other people along the way. We go by things, accidents, we go by different, and if we're observant at all, and if we care enough to greet people and talk to people, you're going to see that there's some needs that maybe aren't present if I just was in a hurry flying through life myself. But it's those people, the widows and orphans today, are those people that are in genuine need around us. And who in the world today that's not a Christian is not in need? They don't even know it. They don't even want us to help them. We talked a little on Wednesday night about this idea of as Christians, not everybody's out there waiting for us to come and tell them about Jesus. In fact, we start to do things that are trying to help them in a spiritual way Today, we may very well be shut off and told, I don't need that. I don't want you telling me what to do. Who do you think you are? So, but does that stop us? No, it shouldn't stop us. If we can't minister to them in that way, we probably have already been praying for them already. It's not the last resort for prayer. When we see people, our attitude should already be asking God what we need to do to help these people. Maybe even started our day out on our knees next to our bed or wherever we were at, and ask God to guide us throughout the day. Help us to be observant, to see the needs that are around us. And once we start to see the needs and we begin to take care of those things, then James says, make sure you keep yourself pure. Don't let yourself be polluted by the world. Don't become like those that you're trying to minister to in the world. Don't let the world taint you or take away your spiritual life. That can happen. It can happen. I want us to think for a minute, the best way for us to keep ourselves pure in the world that's corrupt. I don't think it's going and getting in a monastery someplace and just reading the Bible all day long. We're getting back to the idea of the title. What do we do while we wane? It's basketball season right now. We have the March Madness is well into the mix of things. We're getting down to the close to the Final Four. And if you're looking at these games, and if you know anything at all about some sport, they're all pretty much the same when it comes to what they're trying to achieve. What is the best defense that a team can have? In football, in basketball, baseball, all of that. When does people score points against you? They are on the offense at that point. Our best defense for us as Christians to keep ourselves pure from this world would be a good offense for the Lord. We ought to be in the business of doing what James said, taking care of those around us that have needs, loving our neighbor as ourselves. If we're in the business of doing that, we don't have to work too hard at making ourselves pure, because we're already doing what God has asked us to do. My parents and others that I've met along the way that told me and give me advice, they don't want you idle. Idle hands are the devil's workshop or whatever. If we're not busy, we have more chance of getting into trouble. And so I've listened to that over the years, and I even have an answer for people when they tell me or ask me something about life, and I'll say, well, I'm busy. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, so I don't have time to get into trouble. There's some truth to that, but it's not totally the way it is. There is dangers out there in the ministry and doing the work that needs to be done. But James knew what he was doing. That's why he said he's kind of a deep-thinking genius that just a few words, and he got it down. He knew that if he could have wrote this a different way. He could have reversed the order of these two things that he asked us to do. I think there was thought put into him writing this. Take care of the orphans and the widows, and keep yourselves pure. We would have a hard time keeping ourselves pure if we weren't taking care of the orphans and the widows. And if he said that first, the other way, what would we try to do? What would we spend all of our time doing? We'd be spending all of our time trying to stay pure. And we do that a number of ways, and we would try to find the easiest way to do that, which to me would be closing ourselves off from the world, not allowing myself to even associate with the world, and then we won't see any widows or orphans to have to deal with. So, that's one way of looking at it. That's not what Jesus had in mind, or James. James is telling us the most important thing for you to do while you're waiting for the Lord to come again is to be busy doing ministry to those that are in obvious needs. And how would be the best way to witness and evangelize the world? To just go around evangelizing, or to meet the needs of the people around you and then bring the Lord into that and show them what Jesus had done and what he's going to continue to do? There is some out there that try to just evangelize, and that might work, but I think the best way to do it would be to love your neighbor. Like James said, take care of the widows and the orphans. Take care of all those people that you come into contact with that have a need. Be observant. Look for ways to share and help them that you can. And most of which is not financial. It would be probably more in the line of taking them to town, to doing the things that need to be done. Somebody needs prescription, those kind of things. Just life, going over and saying, can I help maybe clean up your house a little bit today, help you lighten your burden? And a neighbor that does that is pretty soon, if they were thinking about the Lord, they would think of that individual. When I first got saved, my mom was one of those mothers that took me to, before I was even big enough I was in a little carrying thing, the church with her. All the years I listened and was with her. When I got saved, I thought I knew everything there was to know about being saved and living for the Lord. You know, the new Christian is so on fire. And they begin to even pick at Mom and point out some of her flaws. I was dumb enough to fall into that trap that I thought, she's doing stuff that I don't think a Christian ought to be doing. And I didn't tell her that. I just acted like I knew that. And so it was a little bit later, the Lord left me go down this path that was very shaky. And I realized once I was married, once I had children, once I had people attack me, somewhere during the day, I didn't see what happened to Mom, to make her do what she did, but that didn't matter. I know best because I'm a Christian and I'm on fire, and I'm not going to vary off of the path, and I don't want Mom to, and so I even actually, along the way probably tried to correct my mom a time or two. The Lord eventually fluffed my back of my head, got me to see things in the right light, and I realized that if you're talking here, James, if he was wanting to put a picture to show us what that meant when he was talking, take care of the widows and orphans, or love your neighbor as yourself, Mom's picture would have been out there in the margin of that. Mom took care of everybody on our street. She was, at the time, was one of the youngest mothers on that street, and all the other ladies were probably 20 years older than her. And Mom did not jump in the car and go to town without calling the neighbors and saying, I'm going to town, do you want to ride with me? Do you want me to pick you something up? You need to go to the doctor, you need prescriptions, or I know you just had cataracts removed, do you need me to stop and put drops in your eyes? Whatever. Mom did that. She showed me what it was like to love your neighbor as yourself. And it wasn't like she was not a busy person. She wasn't sitting at home waiting to do all these things. She had 2 cows to milk and a couple of pigs to feed and about 100 chickens, and if you can feed, I guess 2 or 3 chickens wouldn't be any harder, or 100 more wouldn't matter. You just feed them, so that would be not a problem. But she had to gather the eggs and do all the different stuff, and then she drove school bus. And a few years later, she drove the school bus and still did all that. And then, but she would always ask the neighbors, ladies. And then as they got older, one would pass away, and then there was one less. And Mom went downhill as soon as the final lady on her street was not able to have any needs because she passed away. I could see that Mom felt a little bit that was God's gift that she had been given, to take care of, to be hospitable, to take care of those in around her. Now, Mom she's like anybody else. I mean, no better than your mother, but she was a mother that did what the Bible says she should do. I thought she should spend more time trying to keep herself untainted from the world. You know, she had some edges that once in a while somebody would, and I look back now and I don't know how she stayed as sane as she was with all of us kids that didn't do what she asked us to do most of the time. That was not the Sunday school kids and going to church with her and wanting to go to church. We probably drove her to where she would have wanted to get a broom and wait till we went to sleep and then beat us. She was not very big. And to get advantage of us, she probably would have taken her, wait till we went to sleep, and then got a broom and worked us over in bed. But Mom she took all of that in stride and still had something left over to help somebody in need. And the Lord showed me that Mom had it right. We helped those that were near. She just so happened to take care of the neighbors and treat them as good as she would have been treated herself, wanted to be treated herself. In doing that, she went a long way toward keeping herself spotless from the world, keeping herself pure. So when we get back to the idea of the sports thing, the best teams are the ones that have the best offense that are keeping the other, and I don't know hockey or any of that, but I do know that you can't score for the other team if the hockey puck's on the other end. So at the best, get the puck up in the other end up there and let them bang around trying to bring it down. If the other team is spending all their time within 20 feet of the goal, the whole game, buddy, you're going to have, the defense is going to be pretty rough. And I've seen it happen where they've made it, but they're most of the time, the team that's in offense, most of the time, and football is very much that way. Whoever possesses the ball most of the game is usually the one that wins. Jesus wants us to be about offense. Be about taking care of the widows and orphans, and be a good neighbor for those that are in need. If we're doing that, we might not be we might still have to watch ourselves, because Satan's nasty. Satan's not about sitting beside you in church pew and telling you something while you're trying to listen, or what you need to be doing when you go home, or whatever. But for the most part, if we start to, if Satan's telling us to go do this, and you say, my neighbor needs some help here, I'm going to go do that, you've got yourself in a lot better position to come out pure if you're listening and doing these things. James, I believe, had the right order of those things. I think he was there smiling, knowing that when you do all the first part, you're not going to have a lot of time spent down here taking care of keeping yourself pure, because you're already doing it. You're already working on it. Somebody that's not pure is not going to be taking care of the neighbor. If they are, they're doing something wrong with the neighbor. So that's just where I'm at here today. That's what God is telling us. So what do we do while we wait? What does God want us to be about doing? If we interpret what James is saying here to meet needs of those that are really in genuine distress and needs, that's what we should be about doing. Love our neighbor as ourselves. If we do a very good job of that, it'd be just a little tweaking here and there to keep ourselves pure. If we can do it. And we'll be doing exactly what it takes to make it to heaven. By the way, that guy that asked that question about who his neighbor was, when it was all said and done, he didn't look so good. Jesus pretty much pointed out what he needs to do. And he didn't care much for the answer. Help us, I pray, to be able to do what James is saying here. Let us be a good neighbor. Let us love others the way we would like to be loved. Just do it. Let's close in prayer. Father, we come to you right now thanking you for the opportunity of this day. We ask your blessings on as we continue to be here today, as we continue to worship you. We're on our way to our homes or wherever we need to be going today. Go with us. Remind us all the time that we're not in this life just to take care of myself. We're here to be of value to the kingdom, to other people's walks, to help somebody else in this life, to help their burden become lighter and guide them to you. Father, help us to do our part in our job the best we can. Keep you first in our life so that we can see the needs of those around us. We love you today. We thank you and ask your blessings as we continue our time today. We ask this in Jesus' wonderful name.